Hey everybody, this video lesson is going over the lesson in the week 8 module on sentence combining. So hopefully you've already taken a look over the handout. So I'm going to go over that and stress some of the more important ideas contained in the handout. So the handout starts off with two sets of sentences, 3 sentences in each set, and it asks you for each set, out of those 3 sentences, which do you think is the most important idea? So we have that first set about Return of the Hideous Vampire. And we have 3 sentences about that movie. It was produced by Paramount Brothers. It is one of the best horror movies of the last 10 years, and it was filmed in Technicolor. Now, out of those 3 sentences, which one do you think is the most important? Probably the second one, that it's the best horror movie of the last 10 years. The other 2 sentences provide interesting or perhaps useful information, but it definitely seems like the emphasis is placed on the idea in the second sentence, right? Same thing with the second group. So we have about Ernest N. Dugood. He is a Republican. He has announced his candidacy for president of the United States, and he is a senator. So again, we have 3 sentences, all of which contain useful information, but there is one sentence that seems to be a little more important than the others. Probably the one that tells us he's announcing his candidacy for president, right? Like, that's a big deal. So what those 2 questions, it's the same question for both sets of sentences, what it's trying to get you to think about is that not all thoughts are created equal, right? Yes, everything that you're including in your writing, if we're looking at, let's just say, one paragraph, everything that's in that paragraph hopefully is important on some level and should be included in the paragraph. But even then, there's still levels of importance within the sentences, right? Some sentences just carry a little more weight than others. So knowing that helps us in a couple ways, but the way we're going to talk about right now is how to take information and create more complex, fuller sentences, but still making sure your reader understands which thought is the most important thought. If you leave all of your thoughts in individual sentences, you're basically telling your reader every single one of these thoughts deserves equal importance, right? And that's not the case, right? Sometimes other thoughts are more important than the ones around them. But if you leave them all in separate sentences, your reader isn't necessarily going to understand which information to focus on, which information to retain the most. The other example that it gives in italics right underneath that is a little kid's account of a movie, right? So the synopsis sounds very childlike. First, the cowboy woke up, and then he got dressed, and then he went downstairs, and then he got on his horse, and his horse's name was Big Boy, and then he rode off on the horse, and then he fought the bad guys. You can't help but sound childlike yourself when you read it. And in a child's world, in a child's mind, all of those details are equally important. However, as we grow and mature and learn, we understand that all of that information, while it might be interesting to hear, the most important part about all of that is that the cowboy went off to fight the bad guys, right? At the end of the day, that's the part we want to focus on. So we want to put all of that information in there, but we want to do so in a way that still highlights the thought that deserves the most emphasis. So combining your sentences helps your writing keep from sounding childlike. It keeps you from having those short, choppy sentences. And it conveys to your reader the importance of the thoughts you've included in your writing. So if you scroll a little bit further down on the handout, you'll see that there's another example. It's got quite a few sentences in it. It's about the Latin teacher. And it goes through the process of taking all of that information, that's in 8 separate sentences to start. And how can we start combining that information so that our reader still gets all of the details that we want to provide, but they're not delivered in these short, choppy sentences. We have created more complex, more mature sentences and emphasized what we want the reader to focus on most. And you can see that we take those 8 sentences, and in the first try, we get it down to 3 sentences. So 8 to 3 sentences, that's pretty good. But we can do even better. We can take those 8 sentences and get all that information into just 2 sentences. But we can do even better. We can take all the information in those 8 separate sentences and put it all together in one. So the trick to that, though, is finding the logical connections with all of the details in your writing and kind of grouping them together, if you will. Finding the most logical place in the sentence to place the details. It also means you have to get rid of a lot of things. You don't have to keep the subject, right? That will make the sentence continue to be really long. And if you're keeping the subject, and then if you also keep the verbs from every sentence, you're going to run a big risk of having a run-on sentence or comma splice. So you want to get rid of repeat. You don't have to repeat the subject every time. Just because there's 8 separate sentences to start, that means there's 8 subjects. You don't have to keep all 8 of them in your revised version. Same thing with the verbs. You don't necessarily need to repeat verbs. If a new verb is introduced, that might be necessary to still keep, but you don't have to keep repeating the same verb. You don't have to use it every time along the way in that one complete sentence. You might also have to get rid of a lot of prepositional phrases. So you can see how those 8 sentences went down to just one. Those original 8. She was our Latin teacher. We were in high school. She was tiny. She was a bird-like woman. She was swarthy. She had dark eyes. Her eyes were sparkling. Her hair was graying. We can take all that information, arrange it logically, take out all the unnecessary stuff now that we're putting it all together. And what we end up with is our high school Latin teacher was a swarthy, tiny, bird-like woman with dark, sparkling eyes and graying hair. That's perfect. We got rid of all the unnecessary stuff. All of the original information is still there in the sentence, but it flows well. It's not short and choppy. It's complex. It's a mature thought, and our reader gets through it easily, understands clearly, and isn't bogged down by all of that extra stuff, right? That's what our goal is. There's not really one correct way to combine sentences. And it especially depends upon you as the writer. You're the one that knows what thoughts and ideas you want your reader to focus on most, what you want them to remember most. So you get to decide how to put the information together. One thing that I will tell you, though, is based kind of on just human psychology. People have a tendency to remember the beginning of something and the end of something way better than they remember the middle of something. And out of the beginning and the end, people tend to remember the end even better. So keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out, okay, I have these, 4 shorter sentences. Can I combine this information into a longer sentence that still conveys all the information I want to convey, but does so in a clear, concise way and doesn't bog my reader down with too many extra words and phrases? Where do I place the important information? You can put it at the beginning, you could put it at the end, but I would be very careful about putting that in for the important information in the middle. It's not a hard rule. Not like you could never put the important information in the middle of a sentence. That just depends upon the sentence itself. But just something to keep in mind to kind of help you as you start working on combining your sentences is the beginning and the end are what we remember best. So for the practice exercises, you'll see when you scroll down that I actually gave some suggestions for each set of sentences on how to combine them. But I want to go through a couple of them with you so that you understand why. So the first set of sentences is about Willie. It says, Willie had a beard and mustache. The beard was bushy, the beard was long, the mustache was droopy. Right? So we have this first sentence that kind of tells us what we're talking about or who we're talking about. And then we have these three other sentences that just give us more description about the beard and mustache. So the easiest thing to do here is figure out, okay, we have two things that go with the beard and one thing that goes with the mustache. So let's just take those adjectives and place them in the appropriate spot in that first sentence. So Willie had a long bushy beard and droopy mustache, right? That one's pretty easy to figure out. You don't have to keep all of the prepositions and you don't have to repeat the verbs. Figure out what the information is. It's describing, right? Well, then take the description and put it in the original sentence with the items that each one goes with. Same thing with number 2, except it's quite a bit longer. The photograph of the woman brought back memories. The memories were brought back instantly. The woman was beautiful. The woman was young. The photograph was torn. The photograph was faded. The memories were fine. The memories were old. I don't really think that any of us would put all of that in 8 sentences, but I do think that, you know, we would very likely come across this in an essay and all of that information at least be in 4 or 5 separate sentences. And it doesn't need to be. It can all be in one sentence. So again, look through the other sentences and figure out what that information has to do with the original. How does the information in the other sentences relate to the first sentence? Well, again, it's description. So just take the description and put it in the right spot up in the original sentence. So the torn, faded photograph of the beautiful young woman instantly brought back fine old memories. If you put instantly on the end, that's okay. You're technically not supposed to end a sentence with an adverb. But, you know, that's being pretty nitpicky. But at least if you got, you know, if you figured out, okay, faded and torn go with photograph, beautiful and young go with woman, fine and old go with memories. If you were able to at least, you know, accomplish that part, you're on the right track for sure. Number 3, the dancer was not tall. The dancer was not slender. The dancer was extremely elegant. So what we have here are 2 sentences that tell us what the dancer is not, and then a third sentence that tells us what the dancer is. And you can tell that what the dancer is kind of surprising considering what the dancer is not. So you want to connect those 2 ideas. You want to make sure your reader understands that this is a bit of a surprise. While the dancer was not tall nor slender, she was extremely elegant, right? Go down to number 6. It's probably the last one that I'm going to do on the video. It's about St. Valentine. This is another one I wanted to point out because you have an opportunity not only to practice combining the sentences, but also creating cohesion with your thoughts by connecting the ideas in it and using a transitional phrase of some sort to show how the 2 are connected. St. Valentine is the patron saint of lovers. St. Valentine was never married. That's a bit of a surprise or irony. The patron saint of lovers. He was never married, right? So how could you express that kind of surprising news while combining these two sentences, putting the thoughts together? You could say something like, even though he was the patron saint of lovers, comma, Saint Valentine was never married, right? Or Saint Valentine is the patron saint of lovers, even though he was never married. You could even just do Saint Valentine, comma, the patron saint of lovers, comma, was never married. And then maybe you're following that up with something that kind of touches on the fact that that's kind of a ironic or surprising fact, whatever the case may be. But use your best judgment when you're combining your thoughts, especially if I've pointed out anywhere in a draft or whatever that you've got some short choppy sentences. This is how you want to try to start fixing that, is looking at the thoughts contained in those short choppy sentences and trying to decide, do they go together? Can I put these ideas together in one sentence, right? Remembering that you got to get rid of repeating the subject and repeating the verbs. Got to get rid of those transition or the prepositional phrases. You have to make sure that what you end up with does not contain a run-on sentence or a comma splice. It's a very easy trap to fall into when you start working on this lesson and combining complete sentences, right? You run the risk of forgetting that you left a subject and verb in another part of the sentence and now you've got a run-on. But the goal is to have fuller, more complex sentences. It takes your writing to a higher level, and it shows a little more maturity and complexity in your thoughts. So that was the point of having you do this exercise and go over the handout, is helping you work towards that goal. There is an exercise that goes with this where you will have, I think there's 5 sets of sentences, and you will take the information provided in each set and create one sentence out of the information. Some of them are fairly easy. At least one of them is a little bit more difficult than the others. I think the instructions tell you that you can use a semicolon once, because remember, a semicolon is used to separate 2 complete sentences but allow them to stay together. But you can do all 5 sets with no semicolons. You can do all 5 sets with getting all the information into one traditional complete sentence with no run-ons, no comma splices, and without the need for a semicolon. So give it your best shot. I'll be looking over them and giving you my feedback and letting you know how you did. If you have any questions about this lesson before or after you do the exercise, get in touch with me and I'll help you out as best as I can.